I'm Tiffany Marcito. I'm a supervisor for Adult Protective Services with El Paso County DHS. I'm here with Eric Bidwell. He's a manager within DHS. He oversees the Adult Protective Services program, as well as long-term care medical program and adult financial programs. Eric, let's start talking about mandatory reporting and what mandatory reporter responsibilities are to the at-risk adult population.
So mandatory reporters are outlined in Colorado statute, and essentially they can be summarized as individuals that may come in contact with at-risk adults through the course of their normal job duties, professionally at work. And their requirement is that they need to report any concerns that they have of potential physical abuse, exploitation, sexual abuse, or caregiver neglect within 24 hours. And that report needs to go to law enforcement. That's their requirement. And there is a second component within the statute that talks about what's called urged reporting. And essentially, there is a recognition that self-neglect is also a potential form of abuse or neglect. But because adults have a right to self-determination, that's not required under law. It's just strongly encouraged instead, and the term they used is called urged reporting. But generally speaking, any mandatory reporter is a professional that could come in contact with an at-risk adult over the course of their job duties.
Would this also apply to care facilities?
Yes, so it does apply to care facilities as well as all of the staff that work at a care facility. But it's also important to point out that there are licensing requirements around care facilities, both in-home as well as facilities, brick and mortar facilities. And those licensing requirements are overseen by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and not investigated by DHS or Adult Protection. And so really what we're looking at is, did a specific person abuse or neglect another specific person? If it's something more broad than that, or is potentially a violation of licensing, that would be handled by that other entity.
So you use the word at-risk adult in your explanation of responsibilities of mandatory reporters. Mm-hmm. Can you explain more about what an at-risk adult means?
Yeah, so for mandatory reporting purposes, an at-risk adult is any adult that is 70 years old or older, or any adult over the year of 18 that has some sort of intellectual or disability impairment. That is the mandatory reporter or law enforcement version of the definition.
So how does that relate on the adult protection side?
So adult protection has a little bit different definition of the same term, and generally what that means is an at-risk adult for APS is someone who's not able to obtain services for themselves. That could be because of some sort of physical incapacity. It could be because of some sort of cognitive delay or incapacity. But it doesn't focus so much on the reason. It specifically says if they're not able to do this, if they're not able to get those services themselves or able to access and set those things up, they meet the criteria of an at-risk adult for adult protection purposes.
Is the requirement to report to law enforcement common across the country? And how does adult protection end up getting the report if it's required to be made to law enforcement instead of APS?
Yeah, so Colorado is very unique in the way that it has its reporting statutes set up. Most states have it so that the report would, by law, come directly to adult protection. But the benefit of the way that Colorado is set up is that because that is required directly to law enforcement, the individuals who are really determining if there was some sort of criminal involvement or there needs to be some sort of formal charges drawn because of the report, it's going directly to those folks first. And then the statute also says that they then, at law enforcement, have to turn it over to adult protection within 24 hours. So that's the mechanism that we typically get those reports through, but it functions really well because the most severe reports, the ones that really need immediate action, are going to go directly to law enforcement that has the capacity to respond in that nature rather than the other way around.
Do entities have their own reporting processes? And how does that impact reporting to law enforcement or APS?
Yeah, so many care facilities or in-home providers or even doctors' offices may have an internal administrative process that they want their employees to follow. As an administrator, I can certainly understand if my employee needs to make a legal report about something, I would want to be aware that that occurs. There can be potentially an issue, though, if the employee believes that by making that report or by letting their administration know and following that process, they've satisfied the law that says they have to report to law enforcement. But that isn't the case. And so what we try and teach when we go out in the community and we work with these partners and entities, we try and say, you know, follow your own process for sure, that's not an issue, but also you have to make this report to law enforcement. One doesn't stand in place of the other. If you have an internal process, it's totally fine to follow that internal process, but you also have to make that report to law enforcement.
So what kinds of things should we all be looking for in the community to potentially make those reports about possible abuse, neglect, or exploitation of at-risk adults?
Yeah, really, so there's a lot of various things that could potentially be a flag or indicator that there's some sort of abuse or neglect occurring in someone's situation. But I think the easiest way to kind of sum those things up is really if you notice something out of the ordinary, okay? It could be someone who keeps their house immaculate and suddenly it starts to fall in disrepair, or they're not out keeping care of their lawn or their home or whatever. It could be an individual who is always well kept themselves and they start to look disheveled when you see them out and about. Or maybe there's unexplained bruises or injuries that they can't explain, or what they relay doesn't maybe fit with what it is that you're seeing. It's unfortunate, but it's true that most individuals aren't going to feel comfortable relaying that type of personal information right immediately with somebody. But when we start seeing things that are abnormal for an individual who probably has had the same routine for many years, it can key us into that maybe there's something going on with this person. And it's also why it's so important that we maintain strong connections with individuals around us.
I'm curious how COVID has affected the work that we've done with our at-risk population.
Yeah, the unfortunate truth is that COVID has had an impact in a negative manner by further isolating individuals who unfortunately tend to be oftentimes amongst our most isolated population. Individuals with disabilities or pre-existing health conditions, individuals that are of an older age, are some of the highest risk when it comes to this current illness. And by default, these individuals also often stay away from those around them. They, sometimes self-isolate to try and avoid becoming ill. And well-intentioned family members and caregivers also may isolate from them to try and prevent them from getting ill. And so what we've seen is that although the number of reports that we're seeing has gone down, the severity has gone up, because whereas someone might have had eyes on this individual every week or every few days, now maybe it's once a month or once every couple months. And so by the time we're noticing that something seems off, the situation may have progressed much further than it would have in the past. And I think that really kind of broadly speaks to, we need to be aware of those around us, both from a human perspective as well as just being aware of our friends and neighbors and relatives and that kind of stuff, because we're likely going to notice those things if we're staying in connection with them, whether it's because of this illness or whether it's just because they've been isolated for some other reason. The outcome, unfortunately, is the same. We need to make sure that we're maintaining these connections so that we will notice when something seems out of the ordinary or seems strange compared to what we've seen in the past.
And I feel like this information can be viewed as sad, but also in turn, it should motivate us both as professionals and community members to take the time to check on those who may be more vulnerable or isolated in our community more than ever.
Yeah, agreed.